Good morning and welcome to our talk show, Good Morning Greyhounds. I'm your host, Sydney Smith, joined with President Phil Terry. And today we will be talking about the decision to go D1 with UIndy Athletics. But first, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for asking, Sydney. How about you?
Of course, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you joined us today. So for those of people out there who don't know, what is D1 athletics and what does that mean for the University of Indianapolis?
Yeah, it's the NCAA has three divisions for their athletics. There's D1, which is the top division, then there's D2, which is the division UIndy is in, and then there's D3. There's different rules that apply to each, some revolving around scholarships, some involving what championships you can play in, but D1 is the kind of the top tier of the NCAA divisions. It's the one which hosts the NCAA championship basketball games and the top competition in all the other sports. Okay,
perfect. So with that, you kind of mentioned a couple of the benefits there. Yeah. What benefits do you see for UIndy going D1?
Yeah, there are perhaps some financial benefits to D1. Now, I will tell you, Sydney, there are investments that have to be made up front to get into D1. But even considering the investments, there may be a financial advantage for UIndy playing in the D1 arena, meaning more revenue when we play games, an opportunity to participate in championships that provide TV revenue and other revenue which we can use to enhance athletics and the overall condition of UIndy.
Okay, yeah. So you mentioned that there would be some renovations necessary to go D1.
Yes.
What would those be?
Yes. Well, nothing immediate. Let me say that.
Yeah.
Our facilities are sufficient at an entry level into D1. But over the long term, we would foresee needs to invest in Nickerson Arena, upgrades to Key Stadium. But even with that, Sydney, there's other investments we need to make regardless of whether we stay D2 or go D1, such as our swimming pool. Great swimming pool, but it has some leaks.
Yeah.
We got to fix those. It'd be nice to have restroom facilities at our baseball fields and softball fields. So there's investments we need to make regardless of what division we stay in.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you also mentioned investing in TV and broadcasting. Mm-hmm. How would that work if we went D1 or if we even remained D2?
Okay, yeah, and that's a really good question, Sydney, because the broadcasting in D1 generally gets done by national companies like ESPN, and the major networks. In D2, where we are now, we can do much of that ourselves. We might not be able to do as much in D1 as we can in D2. So that's a negative impact to going to D1. Absolutely. It kind of affects our ability to use you and all the great resources and talent we have on campus to do the broadcasting and promotion of our athletic events. Gotcha.
So if we went D1, we would be using those other resources?
It would be a requirement.
A requirement, okay.
Yes. Yes. So, as I say, we'd have to work out, how we still maintain the robust training and experience we're able to provide for you and others in this department. But it is something that we'd have to figure out if we transition to D1.
Yes.
And I want to mention that, Sydney, the decision has not been made to move to D1. It's pending. And honestly, I don't know how it's going to be decided. It's a really important question.
Yes.
And a really tough one.
Is this about all sports that
Yes, that's also a great question, okay. Sydney, because the way the rules in the NCAA are today, you may not make a decision to go D1 for just some sports. You have to take all your sports to D1. Now, that hasn't been true in the past.
Okay.
But the current state of the rules at the NCAA is that if UIndy would make the decision to go D1, every sport would go D1.
Gotcha. Okay. I saw on the student survey that there was also mention if we did stay D2 that there would be tiering of sports.
Yes.
What does that particularly mean, and what would that look like?
Yes. Tiering of sports is essentially a description of how much you invest in your sports.
Gotcha.
At the current level, we are investing significant amounts in all the sports at UIndy. which is why we do so well. You know, we've had some great teams. We've won national championships. We've been honored several times in the D2 world as being a premier athletic university. And tiering would say that perhaps in the future we cannot invest as much in all the sports, and we have to kind of be selective and make decisions about where we're going to devote our resources. Because we, Sydney, like all private institutions, are dealing with some financial challenges these days.
Yes.
And so you have to be strategic about where you spend your money. And we've been successful in the past, but we've had a model of having robust investments in every sport. We may not be able to continue to do that.
Gotcha. Okay. So what does that specifically mean for larger sports such as football versus the smaller sports such as swimming or cross country?
Yes. The way it would probably work is that the big sports, basketball and football, would continue to get significant support. You'd see some of the other sports get less support, which would mean things like less scholarships. It wouldn't mean that we wouldn't have the team, that we wouldn't support it with facilities and equipment, but maybe we wouldn't have as many scholarships positions on each team.
Would that impact the current students that are here with scholarships on sports?
No, we would not change any agreement we have, arrangement with an existing student.
Perfect. Okay. Do you think that this would maybe potentially draw in more students for athletic scholarships?
Yes, the data is, the information we have is that if you move to D1, you do increase enrollment. It varies depending upon the strategies schools have used. Some have been very successful. An example would be Butler.
Yes, yeah.
But that's kind of an outlier. I mean, as you know, they became very successful in basketball, and that attracted much greater enrollment, which was great. But the steady state for most schools that transition from D1, D2 is that you do get a slight bump in enrollment.
Okay, yeah, that would be awesome for the University of Indianapolis,
Yes.
of course, to increase our enrollment. But one downfall I had seen as well is that we would not be able to compete for 4 years.
Yes.
How exactly does that work, and what does that mean?
Well, very good question, too. There is a blackout period on championships, meaning that if we move to a D1 conference, our teams could not play for the championship in that sport for 4 years. So there's the transition period. Now, after the 4 years, you may, but that is one of the downsides to moving to D1, is that essentially all our present athletes would not be then present athletes, because you can't move like tomorrow. It'd take a year or so.
For sure.
But all our then present athletes would not be able to participate in a championship until during their time at UIndy.
How do you think this risk will impact our enrollment, especially with student athletes? Do you think it will push them away, or do you think it will not affect them?
You know, that's also a very good question, and one that we're spending a lot of time wrestling with.
For sure.
Because it works both ways, Cindy. There's some athletes that came here because it was D2.
Right.
And that they would be able to participate in D2 championships. Those students may decide, if the decision is made to go D1, which again hasn't been decided, but if the decision is made to go D1, those students may decide that someplace else is better for them, and they may transfer. We have other students who have expressed a real desire to play at the D1 level. They think they're D1 caliber athletes, and they want to play D1 level and would appreciate a move to that. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, for sure. That's understandable too with any decision like that. You mentioned though the other students as well. What about the students who aren't student athletes? Do you think this decision will overall impact them at all, or is it just the student athletes?
Well, we're spending a lot of time with being focused on student athletes, but
for sure.
We have not been oblivious to the effect it may have on the population as a whole. We think it could enhance it. You know, the D1 experience generally, as I say, causes a school to increase enrollment, meaning that college-age students consider a D1 institution more attractive, by and large, generally for the most part. So we think it could enhance the experience of the other students.
Yeah. What do you think those enhancements may be for those students?
I think there may be a greater sense of school spirit, meaning I think depending on the conference we could get into, we could develop some good rivalries with institutions that are close by or that have better name recognition. And I think that would enhance the student experience. Just being part of a D1 institution, as I said, is generally considered a plus by college age students. So that's what I think would be the benefit.
Absolutely, yeah. Those benefits are able to be seen. I think you also mentioned earlier that it would draw some students in. Do you think that it would be able to draw in students who aren't student athletes to join that campus community?
Yes, in fact, that was what the data was telling us, is that you do get non-student athletes finding your institution more attractive.
Okay. Yeah, so where did you get this data from? How did we gather this?
Yes, we've gathered it from several places. We've hired consultants. We've now got our second generation of consultants who are helping us. We've gotten information from the prospective leagues we would go to and from the NCAA.
Okay. Is this all based on the state of Indiana, or is it wider than that?
Both. It's regional, and it's state.
Okay. Did the research help push the decision in any way, or is it helping lean any way?
It's helping inform, let me put it that way.
Okay,
As
yes.
I say, it is a really tough decision.
Absolutely.
Sydney. And there's pluses and minuses both ways. And very reasonable, rational people can come to diametrically different conclusions based on the data about what you should do. So I think my job has been to help inform the community at large, and specifically the Board of Trustees, about what that data is, what it's telling us, what it means, what the impact could be on our students today and our students of the future and our university now and in the future, so that we can make an informed decision.
Absolutely, and that would be beneficial to help our students in our community, as we've mentioned numerous times throughout this.
Yes.
Do you think that there are any success stories that you've seen out there based on this research within other universities, and what kind of successes did they see? And do you think it would happen here as well?
Yes, as I said, the example that everyone who's pro D1 likes to point to is Butler.
Okay.
And that was a tremendous success story, and they did so well, have done so well with their basketball program, that it's elevated the stature of Butler, increased enrollment, increased the endowment. I mean, whatever metrics you want to use, you can see a correlation between the success in basketball and that. But that is an outlier. By and large, you see modest increases in enrollment, modest increases in endowment. When you go to D1, it's not that you go D1, you become Butler. You go D1, you become University of Southern Indiana, which just moved.
Yes.
Which is, I think, they believe it's going to enhance their program and create success.
Were there any struggles that you had seen within maybe even Butler or any other schools that moved D1?
Well, we did look specifically, Sydney, which I think is related to your question. We did look to see if there's any schools who had ever gone D1 and then gone back. And there's a handful, 2 or 3 examples of where it failed.
Okay.
So it's not, and that's a data point. It's not for sure that you're going to succeed. Which means that if you do make the move, you need to make sure you're going to invest the resources. You're going to take the time and do the strategic planning to make sure that you do succeed. It isn't just that you flip the switch, become D1, and it succeeds. It takes a lot of work to make that so.
For sure, yeah. So do you know specifically what reasons caused them to fail, and if so, what did you guys learn from that?
Yeah, we think the reasons, as I mentioned in terms of the planning, is they didn't have a good plan for the transition. They didn't give thought to strategically what conference they should try to get in, whether that home would create, as I said, the natural rivalries that you want to have an athletic program that excites your student body as a whole, not just your athletes. And so I attribute it to a lack of planning, a lack of commitment to raise the resources needed to make the program succeed. It's a lot of work, and unless you're going to commit to doing it, you should just stay where you are.
Absolutely, yeah. So switching gears just a little bit, what would you say to those who are pro D1, but maybe want to be in a different conference than Ohio Valley?
Oh, okay. If we stay D2, we would also examine the conference we're in. As you may know, Cindy, we were a founding member of the GLVC many years ago, but the GLVC has changed over time. It's still a great conference. We love being there, but it's creating some logistics problems for us today, meaning that most of our GLVC teams are pretty far to the west of us. We're the farthest east team, which creates travel. That's a problem. Not that we're opposed to travel. It just takes students away from campus, takes students away from class, and it deteriorates the academic experience.
For sure.
So that's a problem. So there are options with staying D2 and going to a different conference, which would reduce that travel.
Okay. So with going D1, would we being staying closer to home? Is that correct? Okay.
Yep. Yes. Again, there are several options, but one option that we have been looking at, our longest trip in that option would be shorter than our shortest trip today.
Okay.
Meaning that we would definitely reduce travel time.
Absolutely, yeah. And that would also decrease a little bit of that funding that we would be spending to travel?
Yes, right.
Okay.
There's savings. Yeah, it's expensive, especially if you have to stay overnight, or
Absolutely.
if bus transportation doesn't work, it can get very expensive.
Yes, and speaking of money, there are some investments that we would have to going from D2 to D1. We mentioned them kind of earlier. What kind of investments would those be, and how much would that be, and where would we get the funding for that?
Sure. Let me start with this. There's a baseline of investment we're going to need regardless, and that's about $10 million.
Okay.
We've got to upgrade some facilities. We've got some deferred maintenance in some of our facilities. I mentioned things like the leaks in the swimming pool, restrooms in the ball fields. Those things need to be done anyway. Over time, with D1 to upgrade, especially if we wanted to upgrade the conference we were in, we could spend $30 to $50 million on other upgrades. A key example, Key Stadium's probably it. If you look at the visitor side,
For sure.
It's not very hospitable
Yes.
to visiting teams and their family and fans. So that would have to have an upgrade. Nicholson Arena is a great arena, but it's showing its age.
For sure.
That would need some upgrades as well.
Where would we be getting this funding from?
Yes. We would hope to do it from donors.
Okay.
Yes. We do know that athletics has a lot of appeal for donors, and especially D1 athletics. And so the plan would be that we would encourage our friends and alumni and community partners to help us fund that. I don't know if this is what your question implies, Sydney, but some schools have tried to fund it by adding a student fee. And, as you said, I'm interim, so this may be after me. I would be opposed to a student fee to fund athletics. College is very much worthwhile. It's a great bargain, but it's not cheap. And to ask a student to invest money to build a football stadium, I'm opposed to that.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense, obviously, keeping in mind of our students. And of
Absolutely.
course, as a student myself, I'm sure we all appreciate that.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
in fact, that's the point of all this discussion about D1, D2, is what's best for the university and its students today and long term. And that's, to me, that's our North Star. It's not prestige. It's not necessarily trophies. It's what's the best thing to do long term for our students in the university.
Absolutely. As a student, like I mentioned,
Yes.
that is awesome to hear, especially
Yes.
from president of the university. That's
Yes.
awesome. Switching gears a little bit
Yes,
again.
sure.
So there has been some controversy around the decision already being made within the Ohio Valley Conference between coaches. They say that there already has been a decision been made. How much of this is true, and where might this information be coming from?
Let's start with this. It's not true. Okay. The responsibility for the decision is made lies with the board of directors, the board of trustees. They have not made a decision. We've had several presentations over the last 18 months about D1, D2, but no decision has been made because, Sydney, as I mentioned earlier, it's a really important decision and really tough. So we're trying to make sure we do this right. Now, in terms of the where the information comes from, I see this stuff just like you do. That the decision was made, D1, Ohio Valley Conference. I don't know where it comes from. It may be from someone who the wish creates the fact that it happened, but it hasn't happened, Sydney. And I don't think anyone in our community should assume that it's a foregone conclusion that it will be D1.
For sure, and that is good to hear, especially with the students being asked on the survey. What was the idea behind the survey? Will those be used in the decision tomorrow? Yes, in fact, most of the rest of the day I'm going to be spending making sure we've got a good analysis around the survey, so we tease out all the implications of that so we can present it to the board on Friday. Okay, so with the survey, what information were you hoping to gather from the students? Well, one, just their opinion. What do you think? What's this mean to you in terms of your UIndy experience? And as you know, we've asked whether you're a student or a student athlete, so we need to understand that clearly. That's primarily it, Sydney. We want to know what they think about it and what their thoughts are about how this impacts them and the university. For sure, yes. And you are a recent president. You are an interim. Interim, yes. So how is this decision unique for you? How is this decision difficult for you as a new president? How does that look like for you? Well, thank you for asking that question, Sydney. It is difficult. This is a decision that's going to affect this university for decades, and I'm here 1 year. Okay? Yes. So if the decision could be made later, that would be fine with me. But I think the circumstances are such that this is a present issue, a problem. And as an interim, I think my role is to deal with the present issues and problems. And this is one. We should probably make a decision one way or the other and get on with it. Absolutely. So you mentioned there's a board of trustees deciding on this. Yes. How does that board work? Well, it operates like any board of directors would. It's a large body. We have 36 board of trustees members right now. It meets 3 times a year, and big strategic issues are brought to it for their decision, such as D1, D2. It's organized, again, like boards of directors are. There's a chair, there's a vice chair, there's secretary treasurer. Then there are committees that deal with certain aspects of the university, and the committees deal with issues within their province, and they report up to the board, and then decisions get made by the board as a whole. Okay, so what is the board specifically looking at through the student surveys, and what has their feedback been from those surveys? Okay, we've got some feedback that certain members focused on student athletes, and they're focused on them primarily. Others are, I can tell from reading their comments, they're more interested in this general student population, but they're all considering the effect on students. That, Sydney, I can tell you, is one of the primary factors. Okay. Has there been any feedback from coaches that you maybe have been looking at? Yes, it's kind of like the feedback from everywhere else, Sydney, in that we've got some that are really pro D1 and some that are opposed to D1. Believe our best place is where we are. Both of which are legitimate. I believe all of those opinions are based upon an altruistic belief of what's best for the university, and which is part of the reason why I say this makes it so tough. Yes, absolutely. Do you think, we kind of mentioned this earlier with the students, retaining students. Yeah. Do you think this will be an issue with the coaches, retaining coaches or gaining coaches? It could. I've not heard from any coach saying, if you don't go D1, I'm leaving, nor have I heard if you go D1, I'm leaving. I think it would be natural for anyone when there's a change of their circumstance, like we talked about with the athlete, for them to re-examine and think about whether this circumstance is still best for them. I would hope it would be.
If we did make the decision to go D1, I would hope we could retain all of our coaches. We got a great body of coaches and would hate to lose any of them. And by the same token, if we stay D2, those who are pro D1, I hope we can convince that this is still the best place for them.
Absolutely. Have you heard any sort of feedback from those coaches specifically about being pro D1 or against it?
Yes, I have. I'd rather not say which coach
Oh,
what.
absolutely.
But yes, I've heard, and I appreciate that. Making sure they know, or making sure that the board knows and I know where they stand on this. Their opinion is important. You know, we've talked a lot about students, but we have a larger community we have to consider. The faculty is important on this. The coaches are important. Our donors, our board of trustees, the community as a whole. All these inputs are really important.
So with all of this information and setting your presidency aside, what is your opinion on this decision?
I have some very firm opinions on which we should do, and they change every day. Okay.
That's fair.
Excuse me, meaning, Cindy, this is really important. As I think about it, some days I think, well, you know, probably D1, by and large, for the most part, is best. Excuse me. And then other days, I think, oh no, it's really the D2 factors more important. And my intent is tomorrow, when we have our board meeting, is to not go in there with an opinion.
Okay.
I know the board's going to look to me for some advice and counsel, but I want to make sure that we've got a robust discussion among the full board and that we hear all the opinions and concerns and the emphasis the board members place on all the important factors like you've already discussed. And you know, based on that, that we collectively come to a decision on what we think is best for the university.
Okay, so what pros do you specifically see, or what cons do you specifically see? Either way.
Okay, the pros are, I think, financially. If you're just looking at money, I think that D1 over the long term is best for the university in terms of enrollment and the athletic program, money for the athletic program. I think that's best, but you have to wonder about what it does to your culture. We've got a very unique culture here, one that we're proud of, one that we believe is nurturing for our students and our student athletes, and would hate to lose that. And you risk that at D1. I don't think that's a foregone conclusion that you are going to harm that, but you put it at risk. And so that's an important consideration in my mind.
Absolutely. Do you think that risk or the reward outweighs the risk, or what is your opinion on that?
I'm going to go back to my previous answer. Is that sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Okay.
Understandable.
No, it's just, as I say, it's an important and difficult question. I'm sorry. I know you'd like an answer, Cindy.
No,
For me,
absolutely.
I think this is it, but I truly don't know. And I want to hear the discussion tomorrow and engage with my fellow trustees about this, and make sure that we're doing, at the end of the day, we're doing what we all genuinely believe is in the best interest of the university and its students.
Will we know after the vote tomorrow, or when will we?
Yeah, we've talked about we have to communicate, regardless of what the decision is. We've got to make a communication quickly, and so we will.
Absolutely. So when is the board meeting tomorrow?
Good question. The board meeting officially starts in the morning, but we're not going to discuss athletics until the afternoon. So my guess is that we won't have a decision until 3, 4 o'clock tomorrow.
Okay, and as you mentioned, that will be announced afterwards?
Yes.
Okay, well, that is super exciting to hear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any last-minute thoughts that you would like to share?
No, other than to thank you and your whole team for inviting me here today to have this discussion with you and the UIndy community about this really critical topic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Good Morning Greyhounds. I'm your host, Sydney Smith. We were joined by Phil Terry. We will see you soon.